Hey guys, Spudknocker here, as always, and today I thought we would take a look at the Low Altitude Navigation and Targeting Infrared for Night, or LANTIRN Targeting Pod, and how you can use this pod by yourself in single player. Now before we get started, do note that this technique does not work in multiplayer, as you need a human RIO to employ the LANTIRN pod in multiplayer. This is due to a limitation in DCS multiplayer where you cannot switch between the different seats of your aircraft, and they are reserved for multi-crew to jump in your cockpit. I hope that this will be changed in the future, as it will allow mission makers such as myself a bit more flexibility when it comes to managing how many aircraft are in a multiplayer mission, which pilots are assigned to the aircraft, as well as managing their loadouts. Now, I will 100% stand by what I said in a previous video that the F-14B, beyond being a fantastic interceptor and fighter, is the best bomber in DCS world at the moment. Her speed, range, and payload capabilities, coupled with the ability to defend herself from enemy interceptors, makes her a fantastic choice for deep penetration strikes, and her two-man crew make an excellent choice for close air support and FAC airborne mission sets. All of these capabilities also made the real-life F-14 Tomcat a fantastic strike fighter in the latter half of her life, and a worthy replacement for the venerable Grumman A-6E intruder. After the fall of the Soviet Union and the seeming evaporation of the threat of the Soviet Union, defense budgets in the US began to fall, and one of the first victims was the A-6 intruder and its supposed replacement, the A-12 Avenger. Many F-14 Tomcat squadrons, especially those still flying the F-14A, were also on the chopping block. The future of the F-14 Tomcat in the New World Order looked grim. That was until 1996, when the Tomcat community at NAS Oceania, gathering inspiration from the F-15E Strike Eagle program, decided to investigate activating the latent air-to-ground capability of the F-14 Tomcat as a replacement for the A-6 intruder. Only a few short months afterwards, the US Navy bought its first batch of modified AN/AAQ-14 LANTIRN targeting pods, the same one found on the F-15E for use on the F-14. The biggest hurdles to overcome was the lack of GPS systems in the F-14 and pairing the digital architecture of the pod with the analog architecture of the F-14 Tomcat. To overcome these problems, Lockheed integrated a GPS receiver into the pod and modified its software to provide its own on-screen release cues to the pilot, without the need of full integration of the pod's signals into the mission computer of the Tomcat. An analog TV output is hooked into the video feed of the DCS system to provide imagery and symbology for the pilot and RIO, along with the addition of a LANTIRN control panel and stick in the RIO cockpit. However, these early pods that were used in the 1996-1997 through the 2001 timeframe, which our F-14B is modeled, do have a fatal flaw in them. The laser receiver, the part that acts as like an LST, in the pod, has a ceiling of about 25 to 24,000 feet due to the receiver electronics arcing and sparking, quote-unquote, due to the low pressure. This can then cause a fire within the pod, and due to the fact that the LANTIRN pod is non-jettisonable, will lead to total airframe loss when the fire spreads to the airframe of the aircraft. So without further ado, let's go ahead and hop in the cockpit and see how you can use the LANTIRN in single player, by yourself. Alrighty, welcome back to the office. First we'll go ahead and get the pilot cockpit set up with some lights to make it a little easier for reviewing in the video. We're carrying a standard loadout for an early operation enduring freedom sortie with 2x GBU-10s and 2x GBU-12s. We will of course be keeping an eye on our altitude and airspeed to stay underneath our 24,000 foot ceiling due to our 24,000 foot ceiling on our LANTIRN pod. Next we'll go ahead and turn our VDI into TVM mode, and of course put the jet into air-to-ground mode, master mode. And we can see our HUD getting ready to go into air-to-ground mode. And we'll go ahead and tell Jester to select our GBU-12s. We always want to release weapons from the back of our tunnel to the front of our tunnel, with the lighter weapons in the back and the heavier weapons up front.
Roger.
We've got a couple of tanks out by Bandar Abbas Airport to drop on, so let's go ahead and set up the RIO cockpit with some lights. We'll change our PTID into TV mode as well. And we'll come back to our Lantern control panel and turn the TV feed from TCS to Lantern to bring up our Lantern feed. And we'll go ahead and put her into air-to-ground mode. And then go ahead and cycle through our waypoints to find our surface target, which should be near Bandar Abbas Airport, so we can find those tanks nice and easy. And we'll go ahead and zoom her on in. And we can see a couple little heat signatures out there. Those are probably going to be our tanks. Why don't we go ahead and put our navigation system into ST mode, and we can see up there on the top of the Lantern feed we have the steering cue that is generated for the pilot to our ST mode. We'll go ahead and sync up what our Lantern is telling the pilot and what our navigation systems are telling the pilot. We'll go ahead and come back to the pilot seat, and we can see our Lantern steering cue up at the top is matched up with what our navigation systems are telling us, along with the slant range from the pod and the range from our surface targets on our navigation system. Making sure we're staying under that 24,000 foot ceiling. And we'll go ahead and put the wing sweep into the bomb mode for a precise separation from the aircraft for our LGBs. And it looks like we overshot the target a little bit, so we'll go ahead and bring her right again. And we'll arm up the jet. Keep on lining her up. And we'll hop back to the RIO seat and put her into area track mode so that we can line up our tanks. Back into area mode. And we'll go ahead and slew it over this first tank in the line right here. And we'll go ahead and squirt it with the laser to get a new slant range, as well as to have the pod come up with the drop symbology and a new steering cue for the new location of our actual target. We'll make sure that we've got our GBU-12 selected. And we can see our release cue on the right-hand side of the feed right here, with the little tick mark coming down to the dash lines, and once that tick mark hits those dashes on the release line, we'll go ahead and mash the pickle button and release our weapon. And we can see on our feed in the pilot seat, we've got the Lantern pod right over the top of a tank. We'll hop to the back seat and throw her into point track mode to get as accurate of a laser spot on the target as possible. And we can see our tick mark on our release cue is counting down. Getting closer, getting closer. And pickle. And now we're going to crank it, coming off between 30 and 55 degrees to the left to avoid overflying the target and to confuse any AAA or SAM sites down there. And we'll hop back to the RIO seat and start lasing the target to bring our weapon out of a ballistic fall and into a guided fall. And shack. Nice hit. Why don't we zoom out a little bit on our pod, and we can see those other tanks a bit freaked out and are now roving around a bit. So we'll go ahead and come around for a re-attack. With our second GBU-12. It'll give us a bit of a separation with the target. And like I said earlier, unfortunately you can't use this technique in multiplayer if you're just flying the F-14 by yourself in multiplayer, as the DCS multiplayer doesn't allow you to hop back and forth between the different seat positions in your aircraft when you're flying in multiplayer, obviously. So that's kind of a bummer, and like I said, it's kind of a limiting factor, and I hope that maybe one day that can be changed to allow a player who's flying solo in a Tomcat to swap back and forth so they can do some of the functions of the RIO. That would at least help while we're waiting for Jester to be able to control the LANTIRN pod himself. So we'll bring it on back around, back towards Bandar Abbas. We've got about between 11 and 13 nautical miles separation from the target. That should be plenty of time to reacquire one of those tanks, start lasing it, line up the shot, pickle the weapon away, and then guide the weapon into the target. Also notice we're not coming in on a reciprocal heading. That is a good recipe for getting shot down by enemy defenses. So we're pretty much on our queue back toward the ST. So we'll slave the pod back to ST and allow us to find a tank much easier that way. We'll zoom it on in, and looks like we'll get the next one in the line. We'll squirt the target with the laser to generate release cues and steering cues for the pilot. Put her into point track mode for as accurate of a laze as possible. Bring it left for lineup. We can see our release cue is marching down the line. And getting close. And pickle and crank it. Coming off the target. You can see the nice long runways of Bandar Abbas Airport down there. Bring it to the left, hop into the back seat, and start lasing the target with our trigger. And splash 2 tanks. So we used our GBU-12s first because those are fantastic weapons for engaging armored vehicles on the move or stationary on the ground. We elected to use the GBU-12s first, not only because they're back farther in the tunnel and we want to of course drop weapons from back to front in the tunnel, but also because in case we got an additional tasking that needed a larger bomb, like say a bunker or a large facility. But since we've only got tanks in the area, we'll go ahead and re-attack using our GBU-12s. If you're a pilot in the F-14, do keep in mind that the systems of the aircraft, especially the symbology on the HUD, does not tell you when that type of weapon is no longer available, that you've expended all of them, like it would in the AV-8 or the F-18. So keep in mind how many weapons you've expended. You don't want to fly a nice line up to a target, press the pickle button, and then realize, oh shit, I'm already out of GBU-12s. And as you can see, if we flew that pass in auto mode on the wing sweep, it really doesn't make a huge difference, but it's just a good habit, which unfortunately I didn't do a good example there, but it's a good habit to stay into the bomb mode when dropping LGBs. But we still got a good shack, so we'll hopefully not count that against myself. So we'll bring it on around. So as the pilot here, I'm using a combination of the steering cue that is generated by the Lantern Pod, as well as the actual navigation systems of the Tomcat, and kind of reconciling both of those together in order to get a good lineup on that target again. It's a dynamic thing that you just kind of gotta trust the judgment of your own judgment as to what you think is going to be the most accurate lineup back to the target is. So we squirted the laser again, brought up the release cue and steering point cues. We're a bit closer that time, so less time to monkey about. We're going to be close here, and getting close. And pickle, 1 GBU-10 away. We're going to come off to the left again. We always want to come left off the target, like I said, in order to make sure we don't accidentally mask our Lantern Pod with the airframe. Back into the back seat, start blazing the target with our Lantern trigger. Bomb should be coming down. Should be a nice big explosion. Yep, there we go. That tank is in many pieces. This is probably the most fun I've had on DCS World in a long time, is lasing targets and hitting targets in the F-14. There's something really, really cool about it. The F-14 is also going to be a fantastic platform for FAC-A, for lasing targets for other aircraft, especially LMAVs from F-18s and AV-8s, as that's a weapon that is not in the F-14 inventory, but Tomcat crews, FAC-A qualified crews during Operation Enduring Freedom and Operation Iraqi Freedom really liked using LMAVs and lasing for LMAV carrying Hornets, because the actual propelled weapon of a Maverick and its relatively smaller warhead than a GBU allowed them to be very precise in their targeting of things like snipers in buildings, a machine gun nest in an urban area, something like that, where collateral damage needed to be kept to a minimum. So we'll bring her on around for a fourth attack to take out that last tank. Make sure we keep an eye on the altitude so that we don't accidentally stray up to past 24,000 feet. That limitation of the Lantern Pod for F-14 crews made missions over Afghanistan during the opening stages of Operation Enduring Freedom very difficult, especially in the nighttime missions, as that ceiling, coupled with the incredibly high altitude of cities like Kabul or Gardez, meant that Tomcat crews only flew at about an AGL of about 10,000 feet, which is very low for LGB drops, and placed them right in the envelope of Taliban-controlled AAA and SAM sites. Thankfully, Tomcat crews had the assistance of Air Wing EA-6B Prowlers to jam those SAM systems, mostly older SA-2 and SA-3 SAM systems that the Taliban employed. And thankfully there were no golden BBs that shot down any Tomcats from AAA. So there's our last GBU-10 away. We're going to crank it off the target again. Hop into the back seat like before and laze the target for terminal guidance. And as you can see, you don't have to worry too much about hopping into the back seat right away for lasing. The bomb can fall ballistically for quite a bit and still be able to be guided onto the target. In fact, some Tomcat RIOs preferred letting the bomb fall ballistically for as long as possible before starting the terminal guidance to allow a higher penetration of certain targets. And in some instances, sometimes a GBU-12 would be fused incorrectly or be a dud, still hit a tank, still penetrate and get a kill on that tank due to its extreme velocity when coming at the armored target. So we'll go ahead and put the wings back into automatic mode. We're now shotgun, so we'll go ahead and exfil the area back to the carrier. So I hope you guys liked the video. I hope you learned something. I hope you can jump into this and practice lasing targets and flying correct headings and following steer cues and release cues for dropping bombs in the Tomcat or your multiplayer play sessions. And definitely check out Red Kite's video on the Lantern Pod for a really good detailed overview of how the Lantern Pod works, its different keybinds that you need, and all of that good stuff. So, fly safe, guys. Have fun. Give me a like and a subscribe. And enjoy this fantastic simulator DCS world. Thanks a lot, guys.